Welcome to part 2 of the building blocks of geometry. This lesson is going to focus on perpendicular, parallel, skew, and intersecting lines. All right, so intersecting lines. Remember, a line goes on forever in both directions, and lines do not curve. Okay, once they curve, they're no longer lines. So intersecting lines are lines that have exactly one point in common. So again, here would be a good example of intersecting lines. Parallel lines obviously cannot be intersecting lines because they're on the same plane that never intersect. Okay, and then this symbol with the two lines here is the symbol we use for parallel. But now remember, when you're labeling the parallel lines, you still have to use your line symbol above the letters, and we'll go over how to do all of that as well. Right, so these two lines right here would be examples of parallel lines. Now, you can't just have one parallel line. You can't just have one intersecting line. There has to be a set of these things because they have to either never intersect, so it has to be two lines that never intersect at least, and then it has to be at least two lines so they can actually intersect. Because if one line intersects itself, again, there is no line because it has a curve. Perpendicular lines are lines that intersect to form a right angle or to form several right angles, up to 4, so it can form between 1 and 4. And the symbol that looks like an upside down T is used to label perpendicular lines. So here you go for your example for perpendicular lines. Again, typically you will see that there is a little square drawn, and it's drawn right in the corner to show you that it is a 90-degree angle. Okay, and you can assume that if one of these is a 90-degree angle, then the rest of these would need to be 90-degree angles based on the relationship of angles. Skew lines. Skew lines are a little bit complicated, so here's where they differ from parallel lines. They lie in different planes, so that's an important part here. They lie in different planes. When they're parallel, they lie in the same plane. So think of a cube. So you have the face of the cube, which is right here, the front face, and then you have the top. Well, these two lines aren't on the same plane, but they're never going to intersect, because if you take this line and extend it up and down and extend this line back and forth, because of the fact that they're not on the same plane, they're never going to intersect. They might look like they would in a two-dimensional world, but in a three-dimensional world, they never would. Okay, so skew lines you're only going to see with 3D figures. So they are neither parallel nor intersecting, they are skew lines. So that would be a drawing for your skew lines. All right, so what we're going to do for intersecting lines and all the other lines that we listed before, we're going to draw it, we're going to look at how to say it or read it, and then we're going to write it with our symbols. So intersecting lines, you can draw intersecting lines however you want, but they have to have one point of intersection. So right here we have lines AE and DC that intersect at point B. Okay, so this is how you would say it. You would say line DC intersects line AE at point B. Line AE intersects line DC at point B. So again, when you read it or you say it, that's what it should sound like. When you write it, you would write with symbols. So you have your line symbol on top, intersects line DC. Again, there's no symbol for intersecting, so you would write the word intersects. And you can put here at the end at point B. At point B. Parallel lines. So when you draw parallel lines, you need to use a straight edge. You can't just rough it. You have to use a straight edge and make sure when you're drawing them that they are never going to intersect. So you want them to be straight. What I would actually do is, if you're just drawing it to draw it right now, I would take my ruler. Let me pull my ruler out here. And I would just trace the top. And don't even move it, and trace the bottom, because on a ruler these lines should be parallel. They're never going to touch. They're on the same plane, but they never touch. So when you read this, it would read line AE is parallel to line DC. When you write it, though, to use your symbols, again, you use your line symbol above the AE and the DC, and then you can use your symbol for parallel, and this, when you read it, even though it's written as symbols, when you read it, it's read as line AE. So line AE is parallel to line, and we know it's a line because of the arrows, DC. You could say line EA is parallel to line DC, and you could move these around, absolutely. Of course, we don't need to go through all of those and take up another 15 minutes on the video. So again, if you wrote it down as EA and DC or CD and AE, that's fine, as long as you know that AE and EA are the same line. All right, perpendicular lines. So again, you need to draw a nice straight line, so you'll want to use a straight edge on a protractor or your ruler. And then you can use the protractor to make the 90-degree angle and then use a straight edge to draw your lines. So when you're doing that, okay, so you can use the straight edge and you can trace. Now I can't actually trace, so you would trace down here to show that it's a straight edge, and then you would make a mark up here at 90 degrees and then use your ruler, and I can kind of show you how this is going to work. Ooh, that wasn't too bad for a little bit. Okay, and then we can close this because we're done with this because we made the mark. Now I would use my ruler to make a straight edge with the 90-degree angle. Okay, and I want to make sure that it's nice and straight. And then I would trace. All the way from top to bottom. And again, I'm doing the best I can on a computer program, but then here you know you have a 90-degree angle because you used the protractor to create it. However, I did make one before that is a nice 90-degree angle in all four corners. So to read this, you would say line AE is perpendicular to line DC. Could you switch it around and say DC is perpendicular to AE? Absolutely. There's no right way. I mean, there's a right way to say it, but there's no correct order that you would have to say. You don't have to say the horizontal and then the vertical. It's just making sure that you have the right label for the lines. So again, line AE, here's my symbol for perpendicular, line DC. So remember, you have to have your line symbols. Skew lines. Skew lines are going to be tough. You have to be able to draw three-dimensional figures. So take your time to draw your three-dimensional figure. I always learned that the first thing to do is to draw a square in the front and then a square in the back, and then just connect your corners. So connect and connect. And now it doesn't have to be a perfect square. Like, just make sure that you're connecting those corners and you will be fine. Now I'm going to get rid of all of that because I actually already have a drawing. So now skew lines again would be, they have to be on two different planes. So they have to be on two different faces. So here's the front face. So think of like a number cube. So if this were 1, then this up here would be maybe 2. And these lines are on different faces. So EF is on the 1, but it isn't on the 2. Okay, so BA and EF are never going to touch, but they're not parallel, because to be parallel, they have to be on the same plane and they have to be running the same direction. But in this case, again, it might look like these lines would intersect, but that would be in the 2D world. In the 3D world, they do not. So this would be read as line AB and EF are skew. Again, you could say line BA or FE, or you could say line EF and AB are skew. There's no correct order to put them in. And then writing it, the only way that you could shorten it is to put the symbol for line above AB and E and F. You would still have to write out in words that they are skew. We don't use a symbol for skew. All right, so you have this picture of a number cube, and we are going to find skew lines, parallel lines, and perpendicular lines, and we're going to draw them. So my skew lines, and you need to get a colored pencils for this. So my skew lines I'm going to write in red. So I'm just going to make them in red, and I would use a straight edge, use a ruler to make this a little bit easier. I'm actually going to use a line tool here to make these lines more visible for you. So again, if I choose this line here, a line that to be skew to this line, it can't be on, so here's the face that has 6 and the face that has 4. Since this line is on both those faces, it cannot be on either 4 or 6. It also cannot be on this edge of 2 because we know that they will intersect on this side. However, it can be on this side because of the fact that this is on a completely separate plane and on a completely separate side. Okay, so here we have skew lines. And this is kind of hard to see because of the fact that the die is tipped a little bit. Let's try to make it a little bit more straight for you. So here you have that line, and then here you have your line. And we'll work a little bit more with the skew lines in class with three-dimensional figures. Right, and then now a set of parallel lines. And again, if you want to try to identify parallel lines on your own, it might not be the set of parallel lines that I create, but as long as it fits the description, you're fine. And you can always double check with me in class the next day to make sure that you found parallel lines. Right, so a set of parallel lines, again, I'm going to use my line tool. So here I have this line on that edge and this line on this edge that they're never going to touch, and they go in the same direction and are on the same plane. So they are parallel lines. And my perpendicular lines, I will go ahead and use green. Perpendicular. And my perpendicular lines, again, have to intersect to make a 90-degree angle. So I am going to use the bottom of the 2 and the side of the 2. Okay, now this doesn't look so nice because of the vantage point that we have on the number cube, but you know that right here these actually make a 90-degree angle based on where they would be with the real three-dimensional figure. Right, so unfortunately I can't make this look much nicer than that. So work with me and know that this is a 90-degree angle because you know what a number cube looks like. Again, we'll have examples of this in class with actual three-dimensional figures, so that will help us out a little bit. All right, so the last part is the you-try problems. You are going to write down as many sets of skew lines, parallel lines, and perpendicular lines that you can find. So remember, you have to write it out using your symbols. So you can either write out line MR and line NO are skew, or you can, using the words line, or you can use the symbol for line and then write the MR and the NO are skew. Parallel lines, why don't we practice using our symbols? And perpendicular lines, why don't we practice using our symbols so that we have a little bit more room. Right. For this, I need you to find as many as you can and trust your instincts, do your best. You don't have to find them all, at least find 2 sets. So the MR and the NO would be one set. You need to find another set of skew lines. As always, if you have any questions, please be sure to write them down or email me so we can go over them in class.